Boris, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have you because you're actually the embodiment of two of my super favorite things in the world. One is obviously my passion for Japan, but also I lived in Germany for 8 years. And so I'm really excited to have you on that note as well.
Awesome. I think also we have a third common topic, which is the passion for design and design thinking.
That's so right, actually. And I'm super excited, actually, that you kind of started with that. I actually got to know you not only because I saw that we had 100 something common LinkedIn connections, and I thought there must be a reason I know this person, and so I reached out to you to learn a little bit more, and I started to see that your journey with building this design agency that encompasses Tokyo to Berlin is not only began in a really unique way. You began as a work student, but it actually went all the way through to IPO. And there's so much about that journey that I find so interesting. And so I'd love to spend the next hour with you kind of just breaking that down piece by piece. But one thing I want to kind of begin with is something that when I ask people, are you a designer? Or when I ask people something that they get scared about is when I ask in my workshops, who would consider themselves a designer? And no one puts their hand up, even though we're talking with business people who on a daily basis are transforming the as is to the to be kind of situation, constantly. They never see themselves as a designer. So if you could share with me a little bit about your view of design, being a designer, kind of in this modern world, because I think it's changed, don't you think?
I think, one side of me says everybody is a designer. Yeah. And that's also a lot how we work with our clients together. But then there is this other side in me, of course, I have this strong background in the creative space and the design space already from a long time ago. I think from childhood already, where I was loving to sketch things on paper. But and it comes from somewhere, right? So some people are maybe good in music, some are better in drawing and maybe putting things visually. There's also a difference how people are learning, and I'm definitely a more visual type. But let me also it's already great that we talk about design on a podcast called Business Karaoke, right? So there is definitely for me a deep connection of the topic design with the topic business. And I think you're very well familiar with that, but design is so much more than just making things beautiful and making it colorful. Design is really to think deeply how something works. So how does it work? How does it work? How does it feel? How does it make you feel? And this is the good thing, kind of learning about design in the English language, because there you get this terminology right. In Japanese and in German, it's maybe a part of the problem that design is not translated so well. In German, we translate it to Gestaltung, which is definitely putting this kind of aesthetics in the forefront. Gestalt, how to make something look.
Right. And the idea of building something, which maybe then takes away from the other areas of design that we know. For example, like a service design, it's not necessarily the idea of building something. That's very interesting. If we kind of stick a little bit down this design path, and why I wanted to have exactly as you mentioned to have you on the Business Karaoke podcast, is that there's a shift right now from design in terms of just product design, but to design your entire business. And if we think about where we are right now, you and I are talking in 2021. This means that we're still right in the thick of I would say the coronavirus, but in terms of the shock factor of corona is gone now. We're all used to it now. We're all living this pandemic, but we've all had to rethink our businesses as well in terms of how we design, how the design, the way we communicate, the design, the way that we collaborate. How has that been for you and your business as a design company in this kind of new setting?
I think when I think of my team and myself, everything was super tough for everybody, right? I mean, including our firm, we had to navigate through this. But I do actually would say that I enjoyed at the same time. So this is maybe it helps a lot, this optimism that we as designers kind of have, very internalized. So not having all the answers at the moment, it doesn't make us too uncomfortable. Like there is this one big, quality of any, like, let's say, designer, is to stand there and say confidently, I don't know, but we can figure it out somehow. I don't have all the answers right now, but let's figure it out together. So I think that attitude helps a lot. And that is also a big part of that mindset that I would say, that made me so convinced that design is that area where I want to spend my professional life in, because there's a lot of things to figure out, and that's fun. That's a fun part of it. So you, in business world or also in business school, too often you're like forced, or like you're supposed to have all the answers right away, but that's really seldom the case, and everybody has to figure things out.
That's so true, and there's so much, and I think that's summarized for me how, as a business professional and someone that hasn't studied design in the way that you have, that I would also consider now myself, after like a big journey, that I can also say, yes, I would say I'm also a designer, in terms of being able to stand in front of a client and saying, we don't know, but let's do this together. And I think, co-creation is something I want to talk to you about. But I think that's really the essence of this new model of leadership that I think we'll see not only in design, but also in business. But before we jump into that, let's like rewind the clock. Let's go like way, way back, and tell us a little bit about how you first got involved with this company that you've now, opened, that you've taken to IPO, and then also built some overseas offices as well. Tell us a little bit about how that began, because it wasn't the kind of the standard journey, was it?
So I'm with the company Goodpatch for now almost 8 years, and I'm just 35 myself. So it is like quite surprising for some, maybe, in my friend circle that have been switching jobs. It's a very normal thing that you might do a few jobs, stay in a company like 3 years, but I'm already 8 years in my like first real job. And I think
it's very anti-millennial.
Yeah.
It's very anti-millennial.
But I'm super lucky with that, and I appreciate this opportunity. It has a lot to do, I think, with that inner kind of like positioning. So I realized also in conversation with friends that there's like two types of person. I think there would be the one who would be maybe realizing it's not for them anymore and they are moving on in a new environment, or there's those who would change actively that environment they're in to make it fit. And I don't know like why that is, but I have been actively shaping my different roles in that company, and that they have been evolving ever since. It was 8 years in the same company, but there's many different roles that I've probably been doing. But I joined when I was in Japan, living in Japan as a student at that time. And I was like interested to find maybe a new generation of a Japanese firm that I could fit in. I got a bit of a glimpse of like what maybe more traditional companies would look like. But then I saw that was like 2000 and when was that? 13 or something, when I was the first time like living in Japan, and that was a really cool atmosphere at that time, with a lot of startups coming up, and a lot of this scene has been forming, and was still small compared to other places, but Tokyo is such a great place for networking, and that's how I quickly understood what's happening, and then this company Goodpatch just stood out a little bit to me.
That's so interesting. And I think that idea, there's actually something that in 2011, when there was the earthquake, I actually was in Japan, and I had to transfer from Japan to Germany. And people thought, oh, gee, so different. Japan and Germany, like they must be so starkly different. And me being like neither Japanese nor German, I actually
Mhm.
saw that Japan and Germany had a lot more in common than one might think. Obviously, the huge difference is like the directness in terms of communication, right? The directness in
Mhm.
terms of communication, like, you know, hi or yeah or like yes or no, like yeah or
Mhm.
nine, that's like a very different thing. But there was one thing that stood out, and I think I just heard it in your story, which is that when people would hear about this thing called lifetime employment in Japan, or these that the German
Mhm.
employees would stay like a very long time in a company, people would say, gee, isn't that boring? But I think you highlighted the essence of these companies, which was, it's not like you join as a marketer and you stay a marketer for 40 years. You join and you grow with the
Mhm.
company, and as opportunities arise, you put your hand up and you say, hey, I'd like to join this new team, or I see an opportunity.
Mhm.
And because of because there's that trust within the organization, and because you've kind of been there a while, they are more open to translating your previous success in maybe like a parallel, not a parallel industry, but maybe like a parallel activity, that they
Mhm.
say, you know what, Boris did a really good job doing that. I know this is a totally different thing, but if he took that same, mindset to this new job, then maybe, he's really the person for the job. Would you say that that's, or how would you say that that's something that you maybe
Mhm.
experienced in that company, despite it being a small company? Is that something that you felt?
Yeah, totally. Mm. After all, like, you're so curious to see how things evolve. Maybe that's more um, like what motivated me. I think like seeing a potential in an organization, and then actually
Mm,
how many moving pieces there are, and then I quickly enjoyed this feeling of being being part of a fast growing environment, that there's so many things that can happen without you actively touching it. And then there would
mhm,
be something interesting happening in that corner of the company and in that corner of the company. And as a sum, there is quite a lot of momentum. And that fascinated me a lot. And and then I think it has to do a lot with I'm personally very curious about the potential maybe that I have as a person, and how can I make
mhm,
most of it, and then maybe also interested in that, seeing that in others, and seeing that in an organization, what can it become,
mhm,
um, and it's really funny to look back and see how we started out and how it actually became something proper, like uh, yeah, it's a very long evolution, and it takes a
mhm,
lot of people, not only those people who are right now in the company, but also those who have been with us for a while and moved
mhm,
on to other things. And then you get to know so many people. So when you are like 8 years in a company, you see hundreds of people joining your team and leaving again.
mhm,
And
mhm,
there's still a few people who stick around, right, for that years.
mhm,
And you see them kind of founding families, or like
mhm,
doing all kind of things, um, yeah, and also progressing with their life. It's really nice. I think
mhm,
long-term kind of like perspective are so important, but at the same time, when you and that's maybe something that I would say, like, is anyways a good idea. Choose the people that you work with carefully, and if you cannot
mhm,
imagine working with them for like a lifetime, then maybe
mhm,
don't do that at all. Like
mhm,
it's really not sustainable to kind of like have to create a new network every 2 years. Like
mm,
and probably with you the same. There's a few people that have been following your path for a while, and you somewhat always cross again
mhm,
um, on certain things. And yeah, those are
mhm,
very fixed, let's say,
mhm.
um, people
But
in
if we,
your work.
yeah, I think that's, I couldn't agree more. And I guess one of the reasons why it's so important, in my opinion, to have that
Uh,
is because crazy things happen, Boris. Crazy, we have global pandemics, you lose huge client accounts, crazy things happen. And, when you need to kind of get through those tough times, you want to do it
mm,
with people who you can kind of rely on, or who you enjoy.
mm,
You sparked my interest when you started talking about how things have changed, from when you kind of began to like it becoming kind of like like a proper, you called it like a proper business. Talk to us a little bit about maybe some moments that stood out for you from this kind of, joining this kind of 10-person design team with like a big vision to, building it up to a company really that was ready for IPO.
Yeah, when there were 10 people, there was not that idea of like doing an IPO, but that came quickly after our first investor, I think, got on board. We started to, next to our agency work, we started to build our own software, the prototyping tool Prod, and we got the first investors. They then maybe showed us the path that an IPO could be possible. And then it was like super interesting from that starting point, just because it opened perspectives and like we never thought about this or considered that. And then that was kind of like something that also excited me quite a lot. Because the question is, how can a design agency stay independent? And we have seen so many acquisitions in the design space from like consulting firms or big branding holdings, and there's you every now and then you have another great design agency which is being bought up. Like recently, for example, Ueno, a super awesome design company with offices in Silicon Valley and originally from Iceland. They sold to Twitter, and then that's from one day to the next, that company doesn't exist anymore. And it has been such a cornerstone in the design scene. And there's a few others. I mean, even IDEO, one of the most respected design firms, have been selling part of the company to Hakuhodo, and this is just something that is really hard to avoid. And what then was fascinating is to understand that this kind of strategy, which is maybe a bit Japan related, to do an IPO, this has not been done by any other design firm. Right, and because an IPO is maybe out of trend, or like, let's say, like there's different ways these days to kind of like raise money, but in Japan it's very interesting that IPOs are quite common still, and there are different kind of IPOs. They are like, you're profitable as a firm, you're maybe not that huge, but yeah, and then you can evolve once you're on the stock market. And what happens is that actually you're kind of like, instead of growing more dependent on your shareholders, you're kind of growing a little bit more independent, because it's now thousands of shareholders and not anymore like a few big investors that want to maybe guide you in your strategic directions. But now you're really like a bit more free from that. Yeah. But that was one of the key moments when we realized we could become something much bigger than what we started out as.
That's exciting though, isn't it? And talk to us. You meant, so Goodpatch itself is kind of built up from two revenue streams, right? One is the design agency, and the other one is the SaaS, or is the software as a service. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about how those two business units like interact and leverage each other or complement each other?
Yeah, so it has been also a development over the years, right? But I think generally for any business, it's good to understand how can you diversify your revenue streams. So you just don't want to be too dependent on a few clients that could cancel their contracts from one day to the other. How can you then bring in maybe this interesting business metrics, which you are kind of, which you know from SaaS products that build on monthly subscriptions, and they can stack on top of each other. And I think it's the interesting way for any SaaS company, which first of all requires a lot of capital to build. How could you kind of like bootstrap, right? And then the consulting business is quite attractive, like, let's say, option. But then many teams who kind of go into this mode they are easily being distracted from their main mission, which is maybe building the SaaS product. And so like you get caught up in consulting work, and that's really time consuming as well. So I've been witnessing a lot of companies that try to do that. And I think in our case, Prot was the first product that we built, and we kind of built that as it was a design prototyping tool for prototyping mobile apps. So it was a tool that we wanted to really use ourselves. And that was the time when InVision and other tools just came up as well. And so it was so close to our consulting business that it actually was something that we could use also ourselves. So it kind of really made sense that we would be building that. And then we could also introduce this to our clients, and we kind of had that vision of making ourselves obsolete, because if we build a really great design tool, they don't need to hire us as a design agency anymore. So that was the very first starting point. But then it is super tough still to build such like internal startups, because they should really like kind of take that ownership, and building a startup is hard. And if you cannot just assign like project managers on such initiatives. But yeah, we have not been incorporating those different software products. We have always been having them just as internal teams. And we had moments where we build a product and then just the team decided to leave, or, you know, and then you're there stuck with your half-finished product again. This kind of things happen. And from the outside, you always see like a little bit that output or the successful output, but you don't see like, let's say, all the failures, you know. Like, there's a lot of things that you need to try out. And yeah.
Absolutely. I think two things came up for me that I'd love you to touch on. One is that you said you can't just assign project managers, right? That maybe you need people with like more of a different mindset. Can you talk to us about who that person is? Who's the kind of person, what kind of profile, persona is kind of a person to lead one of those more entrepreneurial initiatives within an organization? And the second thing I'd love you to talk about is this idea of, it sounds like you're almost prototyping your business, right? It sounds like you're really doing, you know, what you say, that you're really almost like approaching this prototyping strategy, not only as like for products and services for clients, but it even sounds like you're prototyping your business, right? So can you touch on those two things, like the persona and maybe like the idea of like a prototyping strategy?
I try to give short answers, but stop me please if I go too
No, there's
wide.
absolutely no need. Go on as many tangents as you like.
Remember, like the entrepreneurial person that you're looking for, I think so much depends on this kind of people, if you can hire those. And again, there is like this kind of two profiles, so I would say, of employees. So one is kind of looking at the situation in a company and having an attitude like, if they don't fix this, or if they don't get their shit together, I'm just out of here and I quit, you know. And then there's the other type who understands they're part of the problem, and they can be part of the solution too. So I have been making really good experiences by being very open in the hiring process and say, look, we have a lot of things going on. It's a shit show. Do you want to join us and help figure things out? You know, so that was working better than trying to promote, you know, Disneyland and
yeah, and then they arrive and they're like, what happened?
Exactly. Right. So people are motivated by helping you, you know, fixing things and making things better. So every company has it. So you don't need to, pretend that you don't. It's like, I think, a friend told me this one day, that it doesn't matter also the size of company, like the amount, the percentage of shit show just stays the same, you know. It's like, you're never gonna have all problems fixed, because there's always new problems coming up. So I think that kind of active person you want. And then when I look back at how our company was growing, it was mostly individuals who said, I want to do this, I'm really motivated, like in my case also, I want to maybe build the first overseas studio. I would do Berlin, why not? And that is how these things happen. And if you don't have a person who says like, I just want to do this, then nothing will happen. But it's really like, we would probably say yes to everything, because it's just so great to see somebody motivated to do something. And, why would you stop that person?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other question? The other question
the prototyping strategy. It sounds like that as you guys are building, like you're not only building prototypes and products and services, but it also sounds like that you're almost prototyping your business, how it functions, how people interact.
Yeah. So prototyping strategy. Like one of my colleagues, Sam, he is also doing his PhD next to his engaging job at Goodpatch, but he writes exactly about that topic, prototyping strategy. And it's taking that kind of designer mindset and applying it to how you formulate a company strategy and execute on it. And here again, you don't need to have all the answers. You're gonna have to have that prototype mindset where you try out things, then learn from it, and then start building again. And that loop, that iterative loop is really important. And you want to do a few experiments, and then you're smarter after. I think when we look at our company culture, we have been formulating it also as the so-called Goodpatch OS, the organizational operating system. That kind of thinking is quite established in the software space these days, to think of company cultures like OSs. And it works also really well with that audience that we have, designers and engineers who are, big fans of maybe the iOS or the Android OS, and they understand an OS is something that, needs to fit the purpose. And I say this example sometimes. Imagine that you're not running on a MacBook, but you're running on a Windows PC, right? And would that suit that kind of work that we are doing? In my case, not. And let's say, Windows 95, that wouldn't be suitable anymore. And then you want to do updates on your OS, on your culture. You want to be able to do bug fixes, and everything should come without the need for big restructuring. You don't want like to throw something away completely. You want to be able to just modify it and improve it constantly, little by little. And it helps to formulate those things a bit more like as a living document. So like a documentation which lives in our case on Notion or somewhere, and we can always update it and feel like we just, it's normal that we change it all the time. It's a living thing.
That's really so interesting. I hadn't thought about it in terms of like an OS, but it really does make so much sense. And also it's a really great way to translate something to your people. Because often, if you're an engineer or you're a designer, maybe you haven't spent as much time talking about culture or the influence of like business culture, organizational culture, maybe in your studies. So maybe the first time that you hear about culture is when you're actually in a business and you're thinking, what is this? I don't really understand it. But if you kind of use the lens of an OS, that's a really great way for people to empathize with what you mean immediately.
But I'm a big fan of this management practices, and maybe being able to understand what has been traditionally taught, and what is maybe the latest iterations, and what are the software companies that are successful these days applying. And then you come across different concepts. Let's say you come across maybe objectives and key results, OKRs, which have been introduced to Google very early on by John Doerr, the famous VC, and when he was helping Google to form the first kind of management practice that they had. Or you come across holacracy, which is an organic kind of self-organization management style. And then you learn about all these different interesting concepts. And I have a lot of conversations with other maybe founders and managers. And then we exchange, and I'm curious to learn always what has been working for somebody and what not. And the challenge is a bit, and I speak a bit from like a first-time manager here, like what I had to learn in the past years. And any book or any like new concept, they always try to kind of tell you this is it and you only need this and you should follow it strictly. But the reality is really that you should be careful with such advice, and you should always find kind of the nuggets, the best things that work for you, and really combine it and make it your own. And that's why we call it, for example, the Goodpatch OS. And we have been integrating different elements from holacracy, from OKRs, but it's important that you make it your own. Some companies have been almost like promoting holacracy a bit too much, and you were wondering, like, are they paid for promoting it like that?
Maybe you can touch a little bit on holacracy, because to be honest, until I had read one of your recent articles, I hadn't really heard about it. So can you share a little bit more about holacracy and maybe the role that it plays within your Goodpatch OS?
So what we adopted is really that understanding of roles, and how roles could work together and form circles. It's coming from, let's say, like, it looks more like biological cells structure than it looks like a traditional org chart. So you want to have really the reality of a company being visualized, and you want to know what people are working on. And let's say there's a role, like in your case, maybe you are running the podcast. So the domain would be the Business Karaoke podcast. That is your little garden. And here you can decide who you invite, how it's maybe then being published, and what you guys are talking about, and so on. And that this is then really like your domain, and you form a purpose for that role, and then you are defining a few responsibilities. Now, if another colleague in your team wants somewhat like needs your like support, or like that person knows what you're actually working on and what your goals are. So that person can be kind of like respectful for your time, and knows like what you are actually trying to achieve, because it's transparent, it's documented somewhere. And that helps a lot in a big organization to navigate. And when you are it's like a little bit like your garden too. So like you cannot just walk over to your neighbor's garden and I don't know, like start cutting down the roses. You would have to ask that person if that's okay, or if you could borrow that person's car, just like as an analogy. That what's another big part of holacracy is you can have more than one role. So like if you are joining a company, you probably have a kind of like there's a job title, and then there is like a kind of a job description. And many people join in the company, and then they grow into their job, and they start doing all kind of stuff, and then they're like, we're not originally hired for that, right? Like the reality looks a bit different than from the time when you were probably applying for the job. And so it's totally normal. And at Goodpatch, people usually have like more than one role. They have like 2 roles at least. One could be being responsible maybe on your main job, like for running design projects with clients. Another one would be maybe to facilitate a regular meetup that we are hosting. That then you can maybe think about like, hey, how do you allocate your time? Do you work 80% on this and 20% on that role? But it's really important to be able to have a place in your documentation where you actually write down these 2 roles, because those exist. And it doesn't mean that you need to somewhat like make an internal like job offer or something. Like it's just normal that people are transitioning to different roles and responsibilities, and it helps a lot to make those transparent. Yeah,
that's interesting, because that's probably the reality for most people. It's probably
Yeah.
the reality. The only difference is it sounds like that in this model, you acknowledge that this is a second role. Whereas most people would usually just be like, oh, this person's role is that, role is that they're like the client account lead for X. And the assumption is that you also run this meetup, but we don't officially, acknowledge that that's a second role for you. It's just an assumption and an expectation that you are to then run that. So it sounds like that the more that you document, rather than just kind of things being left up to expectation, the more that you document what people are really doing, it sounds like that giving the employees that acknowledgement not only helps the employee
Yeah.
themselves, but it also sounds like it helps the people around them maybe collaborate and operate better, because there's a little bit more transparency as to where people are spending their time. That's interesting.
The transparency also continues, like with rules. The kind of like the main concept is that, similar to a traffic system, you have very transparent rules that apply for everyone, and that's how you can make it work. That's how you know when you're supposed to go first, or how, where to ride a bicycle, and when to cross a street. That is very clearly facilitated, and it doesn't need like a boss who tells people what to do, or like a policeman standing in the middle of the crossroads. Yeah, and then when you try to implement such a self-organized model in the company, it's important to have very transparent rules, and they apply for everyone in the organization. They need to be documented also, and and updated constantly.
With everything that's going on, and like obviously you're operating in this like very dynamic way, can you talk to us a little bit about the journey of having multiple offices? So one, what was the motivation for having, for example, opening Berlin? And then also, how do you ensure that this company culture is lived in each location? Because if we think about Tokyo as a city and Berlin as a city, they're both very strong personalities, right, as cities. So how do you make sure that Goodpatch is alive and true to its OS, no matter where you guys are?
It's really hard to replicate exactly the same thing somewhere else. So what I would say, it's more like kind of like siblings a bit. So like maybe the big brother is maybe in Tokyo, and then there's like the younger sister maybe in Berlin, and it kind of like same family, but it's a bit different, and they are not like talking about every small thing, but like they check in regularly. When I left Tokyo in 2015, then I kind of thought that, I'm now going to Berlin. I don't need to worry about Tokyo. Everything is figured out. They just continue to grow, and I get the support to build this new thing. But then there was a lot of things we had to deal also in Tokyo in the later years, and it was a lot of ups and downs, and then so quickly it became clear there's the need to just stand on your own feet in Berlin, and it has to somewhat work on its own. And it became, interestingly, sort of an internal innovation lab, I would say. So like a lot of things, maybe such as the management practices, or let's say OKRs and so on, are things that we originally like kind of picked up in Berlin, and in a place where there's a lot of competition from other agencies, and and then you really needed to step it up, and we were soaking up all this know-how and knowledge, and then we also brought over successfully a few things. Next to internal management practices, maybe there was also maybe the whole design strategy topic, or the practice a design process also that was formed heavily over in Berlin and was then imported basically to Tokyo. It was a few things, and the learning, but also the learning is in both ways. So like then we, in the time when it was time to grow up and get ready for IPO, then for example we brought a lot of, you know, let's say like governance or proper structures and internal control things over to the Berlin studio, which was new for us again, and we learned that from the headquarters. So it's really an inspiration in both ways. And yeah, but like what I kind of find fascinating is that let's say the website, for example, it's a bit of a representation of bigger things like that are ongoing. So like in the beginning, I always had the goal, let's create one website as a company. But it's so hard to create a website for a company which is both in Japan and somewhere else. And what information do you put on there, and what is the whole approach to it? Like I'm talking about the corporate website, right? And then at some point we decided, or we made it happen. We made it actually happen. It was really amazing kind of like feeling. But then after a year, then you're thinking again, like, is this really working, or, you know, do we need something else? And then we were like saying like, hey, it's totally fine. These two places are so different, and let's just make two different websites, one global website and one Japanese website. And now we have two different websites, and both are kind of fun and different. And it works almost better. So, or it works better. But like this is such a symbolic kind of little thing, which I find an interesting evolution, yeah, because my mind is also changing sometimes. You know, what my goals are changing.
I think the siblings analogy is, for me, spot on. For me, it's perfect. Like, because that's really what it is. What it's, you know, coming from the same family, you kind of look similar, but each person has their own maybe idiosyncrasies, or you know, their hobbies, the things they like, the things that they dislike, and you know, what they share. And you know, you call on different people. You know. For those of people that have siblings, you'll call one sibling for one particular thing, but you won't call another sibling. I'm the eldest of four, so I know I'll call my sister for certain things, but I'll call my brother or my brothers for other things. You know, so I think that's super interesting. What would you say is maybe the sibling exchange between Tokyo and Berlin? What do you think Berlin brings to the table, and what do you think maybe the things that Tokyo brings to the table as the big brother?
So in Berlin, we have a very diverse team. We have people from many different backgrounds, and really push for that. I mean, we don't even need to push for it anymore. It's just so ingrained in the DNA, not only of our company, but every company here in Berlin, in that same space. And then what happens is, of course, this diversity brings in a lot of awareness for different kind of topics, you know, which leads into inclusivity, or maybe, you know, let's think bigger, like not just about human-centered design, but about planet-centric design, and you know, considering so many different opinions, which really eye-opening for me too. And then we have still that challenge. We still have, you know, to tackle more and more in Tokyo. But it's, yeah, this is something that we can learn from Berlin. Then I think there's such a great business sense in the Japanese headquarters. So, which really enabled also the Berliners to kind of learn from that a lot. Like. The dedication to the business, and how you approach, you know, even as a design firm, you need to think very much about your growth, your goals, your budgeting, your, you know, your sales. So, and I think that is definitely something that also we stand out. And it helps us to navigate also through such times when you have a proper sales approach. It would work any times, you know. It doesn't work only when there's no pandemic and no crisis. It also will work during pandemic, so I think that is really a good balance. Yeah, maybe as a main theme.
Yeah, absolutely. If we think about, these exchanges, we've got the exchange between Tokyo and Berlin, but one exchange that I see particularly living inside you is this exchange between business and design. As a manager of Goodpatch, you're consistently not only committed to the excellence of design, but you're also responsible for a company of 200 people, and managing OKRs and managing client expectations, things like that. Tell me a little bit more about, as a designer or as a business person, well, let's flip the question. What are some of the things that you would tell a business person about design, and what are some of the things that you tell a designer about business?
I do feel that duality, right, within myself a lot, and sometimes it's difficult for me to kind of make a clear separation. But I had it already in business school, where I was a bit different with my creative background, but I trusted that a lot. And there were moments where we had maybe business slides to prepare, and I would push for design slides, right? So you have, and I think that's a good analogy, because in the business world and business school, or also in consulting, they teach you how to design slides, right? Consulting style, and there's certain moments when I now, even in the business, in a design business, I would share that know-how with my designers, and I would tell them how to create business slides to maybe create an executive summary or something, bullet points and just the most important information on the first slide. But then there's other moments where I would have pushed my colleagues in business school to create more maybe design slides, maybe with one big word and one key visual, and you need to know when is the right time for both, and if you can do both, that's, I think, really powerful.
I couldn't agree more. And that's for me, the more that we kind of dig deeper into this business and design field, and especially being kind of at least bilateral kind of professionals, I recognize that it's not just about Tokyo or Berlin, or Tokyo plus somewhere else. It's really, there's so much more duality to an ecosystem, to a business ecosystem, than just simply nationality. There's the design side, there's the business side, the design side, and certainly also the diversity that you mentioned within people that we see in Berlin.
That is that is something that I must say I have learned in the last 8 years or 6 years being in charge. Is really things are not so easily separatable into black or white. So there's a lot of things in between, and to me it helped a lot to realize that, and it applies to almost any situation where you should take a step back and understand it's not that easy. Sometimes I'm trying to rationalize a lot always, and see always black or white, good or evil, or good or bad, or but it's just not like that. There's always a different angle to this, and that perspective I learn a lot from different colleagues. That helped me open my eyes a bit more.
How do you go about, if we think about where we are right now, 2021, the world is changing, it's shifting. It always is, right? It always is. It's not like things just change because of like the coronavirus. But if we think about over the next kind of like 3 to 5 years, what are the services, or in terms of like the design themes, or the topics that you're most excited about? Maybe it's from the Tokyo perspective, maybe it's from the Berlin perspective, but what are you most excited about to working on these kind of projects? Because you mentioned that we wanted, like your 2020 motto was great projects for great people. If we kind of think about what are some of those great projects that you're really excited about, what are the industries that that you feel most of most potential?
Yeah, the question is really what is the next kind of platforms, and and how long are we really still kind of caught on that small screen? That is something that we probably try to figure out, and it probably will be so that augmented reality will be more and more like that platform, but we cannot imagine yet how this exactly will take place, right? But this is an area where we have been investing in, and we have been doing projects. I call these immersive technologies or spatial design. So XR. So I say XR usually as a main terminology. So XR contains AR, VR, or mixed reality. So there's a different terms that you can use, but I think XR is the one that's gonna be the most suitable, or like the one that's gonna survive. So it's really interesting what happens in that space, and also what's gonna be driven by the hardware manufacturers. And if there is a AR headset that's gonna come out, and then we can somewhat see more things around us and can start living life again more beyond the screen. So somewhat have it more in our eyesight, or that is something on that side that's gonna develop now.
For sure, because if we think about it, we've kind of been sitting on, smartphones for probably, 13 to 15 years now. But if we think about it, it is probably time for kind of like an upgrade. Is it just the screen? Is it beyond that? And you also mentioned a term, you and I also, our third connection is obviously design thinking. You coming from a strong design side, my side is more the business side. But as we know, tools and methodologies, they develop. For me, design thinking is a tool in my toolkit. I'm deeply passionate about people, about creating the environment for innovation to happen, for people to feel strong, for people to feel confident. I want people to, that's another reason why the Business Karaoke podcast exists, is because this is for me really what I love. Of course, design thinking is one of those things, but it's always developing, right? As designers, as business people, we're always looking for not necessarily new ways, but just better ways, right? We haven't necessarily, innovated the spoon because the spoon is pretty good, right? But if we think about beyond, for example, design thinking, that there's shifts, and you mentioned moving from human-centered design to planet-centric design, which is for me a new term. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that terminology, what planet-centric design means, and maybe why it's important?
Yeah, so let's say, like, to summarize a bit, so there's the one technology that I see is that augmented reality topics. Another big shift I see is this from human-centered to planet-centric design. And it is surprising how outdated already it seems to talk about human-centered design, and how egoistic we have been promoting this approach as well. Like, it is kind of like from egocentric to ecocentric, or to ecosystems, and we really need to realize that maybe the biggest stakeholder in a design workshop should be kind of the planet, and we should just zoom out a bit more and really ask ourselves, what are we promoting, and yeah, so it kind of like especially came to me maybe last year when there was this pandemic going on, and then we were like wondering like what to do, and what frustrated me a lot is that like we were kind of like able to continue our daily work, but like what did we really contribute in that moment, to that situation? Like, did we make anything better? Why was it not us to build that app, or like that somewhat find ways to support people, or even like just supporting the small shop next door, or like individuals in that moment, like that felt really frustrating, and that made me realize once again that I don't want to work in a design firm but have no like actual kind of impact on even things nearby. It's like, you know, a little bit how they also say about Silicon Valley is like, you know, how funny is that contradiction when you walk to the office, to your fancy tech company office, and you are having to navigate, you know, between homeless people, only to get to your fancy office to then, you know, save the world from there. You know? It's like you're kind of ignoring what's just in front of you, you know. That is, I think, a big responsibility of a design firm to work, you know, on sustainable topics only, or on meaningful topics only, meaningful problems. Like that should be the ambition. And the push comes heavily from the employees too, you know, who want to work on important stuff. So that is one thing, but we're also just getting to know the topic and starting a conversation here and developing tools for that. So like that is, I think, a coming trend for the next years. And another big technology trend, I would say, is definitely the topic blockchain. So it's funny how it now has like a second kind of like revival or coming. So with NFTs, but it's really just trying to explain people a bit better like what it is all about. So using, you know, a great topic here, like creatives, artists who are now finding ways to maybe have different kind of ownership of their art and to sell their art differently to people. And it should be normal people also trying to buy this kind of art and get first of all in touch with the technology, because now they understand what they could do with it. But NFT won't be like, how say it? It's again just a stepping stone, and we will see blockchain applications in real life, and everything will around us will be somewhat enabled by this technology, but we won't really call it blockchain, you know. We are talking through the internet right now and to I don't know what kind of technical protocols, but we are just having a Zoom call, you know, like it's not, we're not thinking about like what technology we're using right now to do this. So it has to also become more normal like that. And it's still like super surprising how much hurdles there are when you think about, I don't know, like what do I need to do to buy some NFT right now? I still need to create some kind of cryptocurrency account. I need to create a wallet. I need to somewhat purchase those cryptocurrencies. I need to be able to understand where do I buy NFTs, what kind of like platform, and then yeah, still a lot of things I need to figure out. So it's not for the masses yet, but these things are just first steps in that direction. So I think blockchain technology will be also really fundamental. And we're thinking about it a lot. What does it mean for our work as designers? NFTs, could we maybe build interfaces which are then somewhat where we have ownership on those interfaces, and do we get paid differently in the future or something like this, you know? And I still have to figure that out.
Yeah. And if we think about these kind of like newer topics that we're all dealing with, and specifically, for example, if we think about your position at Goodpatch, it sounds like maybe something that we were kind of touched on at the beginning that maybe we can kind of maybe wrap up with is the idea of co-creation, that these kind of planet-centric design, and I think the fact that kind of that a quote from you kind of like really stood out to me, which is maybe the most important stakeholder in the room is really the planet. And I can tell you of the hundreds of workshops and the thousands of people that I've worked with and, I've facilitated, that's never come up. And this is really maybe something that as facilitators that, certainly on my side, that maybe I can certainly drive more. But if we think about the kind of the issues at hand, it sounds like that they're complex, but as designers, you mentioned that, the complexity isn't necessarily something to shy away from. But it sounds like this is really a moment where we really need to leverage co-creation, because we can't be experts in everything, that we need to be able to, work together with different people, maybe they're internal stakeholders, maybe they're external stakeholders, maybe they're clients, to really kind of get a broader understanding of the problem and then to create more robust solutions. How for you, or what for you does the role of co-creation play in kind of tackling all of these, not only problems of the future, but also the problems of today?
I think the one of the big benefits that design and designers can bring to the table is to be a facilitator of such co-creation settings. So it's surprising how we come into different kind of companies and only we get the people to talk to each other, from different departments. And
So
you can create a different atmosphere by simply having a standing desk and some whiteboards, of course, and maybe a few designers coming there with a bit more of a casual attire and also a cool confidence to then bring a toolbox of different methods that everybody in the room is actually being heard and can contribute with their ideas, even though they are not the alpha males or something, but maybe more the introvert developer. And they can then actually put their idea on a post-it, and we can do a dot voting, and also that idea is actually being seen and being heard. So I have been having such funny workshop situations, even like, with German companies, we have this do and see, like we are using this different, like, so like for the workshop, the boss allowed his employees to call him with the first name and do, but it was clear that after the workshop, they would go back to the C, right? But like, we do an exception for, our guests from Berlin and, but like, that is just a really visual example, but that's also the same when you do this kind of workshops, as you might know, also in English language in Japan, we get to talk more freely about these ideas. And I think that's actually a big part of our work, hosting such workshops in Japan, is just by simply using English language, we are able to maybe build on the ideas of others a bit more, or like say critiques a bit differently, more casual. So like that is such a big role. And I love this moment they realize, I, as an external person, I didn't contribute anything, but I just made them actually collaborate and talk to each other and have them, being a referee also when there was maybe some unfair play or some comment that was unnecessary, and just reminding them again, look, let's be focused on topic. Let's be respectful of the other person. Let's build on the ideas of others. Like, or let's just write on a post-it so that other people can read it. So like, you are basically just a facilitator, and then the other people are able to figure things out. That is, I think, big part of our work.
I think language is so interesting because I find it similar. So I run most of our workshops in Japanese, but because my Japanese keigo, like itadakimasu, this kind of, very, very formal keigo, I don't use that. I use, of course, desmasu in like very polite language, but I don't use kind of like keigo, sonkeigo. And so it's also like a kind of a disruption as well to the conversation, because it's, well, we maybe, we don't have to be like as formal as well. So I think certainly language does play such a huge role in how people think, how they communicate. And sometimes you being the different person, and then kind of, it's finding that balance between having respect in the room for people, their relationships, the work that they do, but also kind of pushing them a little bit to maybe step outside of that to see, what their potential is as well. One thing that I'm certainly taking away is the idea of that the customers and the people that we're designing for, it's not only clients, it's not only people outside our organization, but thinking deeply about designing for people within your organization as well. I think that's something that I'm certainly taking away. And certainly the idea of when you have multi-city operations, to think about them more as siblings than as twins. And I think that's a really great way maybe to manage expectations, and also to allow each child in a way to develop and grow and contribute to the family in their own special way. So Boris, thank you so much for sharing. And please certainly make sure you do come back and share with us, as we start moving away from the screen, as we start moving towards different platforms, how life is changing and how design is changing again, because I would love to hear your update on that as well.
Life happens beyond the screen,
Exactly.
That's what we are saying. Yeah.
It's our next episode. Thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.